You kids are soft. You lack discipline.
We landed on the moon!
You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility.
It's like we've forgotten who we are. Explorers, pioneers.
Well, that's kind of why I'm talking to you, though. I mean, I don't even know. I'm being honest here. I don't know how you showed up on my Instagram feed. And then I started looking at stuff, and I was like, dude, this guy's like everywhere, which explains why you're so busy. But that's kind of why I reached out. So here's a really quick, kind of funny intro.
Okay.
So this kind of, whenever I reached out to you, like a month ago or 2 months ago, and I was just like, hey, would you want to be on the podcast? And you were like, yeah, sure. So I started looking into more stuff, and then I was like, I swear to God, I have heard of this guy or seen this guy before this, like one-off. So then last week I was like trying to pull up everything I could and look at everything, and I was like, dude, I listened to this guy on Ben Greenfield when he worked on Ben Greenfield. Like,
there you go.
What was that? 3 years ago?
That would have been probably 2.5 years ago, probably. I'm gonna say August. Probably August of whatever, 21, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I had no frame of reference it was the same, and then I was like,
that's
oh,
so funny.
So I re-listened to that, which was, I'm sure stuff has changed, and that's kind of, you were treating as you went, so it's maybe hard to get an explanation, but why I wanted to bring you on today, and so people that are listening know, like, Shawn and I have never met, so good to virtually meet you.
Yeah, you too, buddy.
And as I said, I was just intrigued with what I was seeing on social media, which social media can be if we're being honest, an absolute shit show sometimes of what's actually going on. It can be a fluff piece. It can be, whatever it is.
Yes.
But that's why I wanted to bring you on, and literally it intrigued me.
Awesome.
So do you mind just giving a brief intro, because literally we're meeting. Give me a brief intro on kind of like traditional training, where you're at now, and then we'll kind of get into square one and how the system developed and all that stuff.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, because I tell people all the time, like, I've not intentionally avoided having an elevator pitch. I just have struggled for like now 15 years coming up with my elevator pitch.
I'm with you on that too.
And so every time I get asked these questions, it's just an opportunity for me to rehearse it, and hey, maybe this will be the one that I really, really love and will use in the future. But so in a nutshell, square one is it's a problem-solving framework that movement professionals can use to really dig in, find out where there's disorganization within the nervous system, and then to quickly bring restoration of organization as it relates to getting upright and locomotion. And within square one, we believe that getting upright and locomotion are our two most basic mature patterns. So our belief is that if we can get that stuff a little bit more organized, it's going to have this really cool downstream effect, and it consistently does. So we're very, it's an intended, hope for intended consequences of pain reduction, more athleticism, so more mobility, more strength, more power. But I tell people all the time, I don't have a protocol to make you jump higher. I don't have a protocol to get rid of your back pain. But when we bring organization to the nervous system, those things just almost always appear within the first 1, 2, 3 sessions. So that's kind of what we're doing, is we're resetting, or putting attention on the software aspect of human movement. Because I think a lot of people in our industry, a lot of really great people, a lot of well-intentioned people, but I think a lot of people in our industry, and I was one of them, I was all in on the tissue side of things for the longest time, because that's what I was introduced to. I was just taught, okay, we use exercise to change tissue, and if you're different practitioners, you might use joint mobilizations, or you might use electric stim, or you might use breathing techniques, whatever. A lot of things are geared at the tissue or the hardware, and I just think that by incorporating some software approaches like square one, you can bring much more balance and a more complete, comprehensive approach to trying to help your people. Because I think we all want the same thing, whether we're movement pros, whether we're rehab, performance, or fitness people. We all have the exact same goal. We're just trying to get better outcomes out of the movement system, and we're trying to get those outcomes to not just be quick, but to be consistent and to be long-lasting. And square one, it's pretty freaking tremendous at doing those things. So.
Which there's so much stuff to dive into on what you just said, which we'll get to.
Cool.
So why, from a traditional standpoint, you're a physical therapist, correct?
No, I'm just a guy with a 4-year degree, so I'm not certified or licensed as anything right now. So I worked for years as a personal trainer, became a strength coach, but really I was working in a personal fitness setting. and I learned muscle testing through a system called muscle activation techniques over 20 years ago. And so anyway, I don't know what I am. I'm kind of some kind of hybrid. Like if people come to me for rehab, but then we get athletes coming in. So it's really just, to me, it's all the same stuff. It's just human movement. And I just think I have a unique angle on how to restore, software organization. So I don't know what I am. Former personal trainer, movement guy, trying to become an educator to more and more people in our industry.
So what caused, because again, this is from what I've garnered online, that you kind of had this reclusive period where you kind of self-noted, like you kind of not went underground, but we're working with clients, not putting out information in the public eye to kind of battle test this thing. So what was the need that you saw, or what was the failure point that you were recognizing that forced you to kind of go into this testing mode to realize there's either a gap in your knowledge or the industry's knowledge, or what happened there?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's awesome. So I was doing, excuse me, I was using muscle activation techniques, and I never try to crap on anybody's stuff out there. So if I'm critical of things, I also recognize that everything is helping on some level. And I was helping a lot of people with MAT. I really was. I mean, 2 out of 3 people, I was getting fantastic results with that system, and I was super happy with it. But I had this one client that every time I worked on him, it would actually kind of light up the symptoms, and I didn't know what to do. So long story short, I decided to do the polar opposite of what MAT taught me, and I kind of basically did the polar opposite of traditional thought. So the whole thing with MAT is you find a restriction, and with an MAT, we're taught that every restriction is protective muscle guarding. And again, for a lot of people, that's phenomenal. So if we kind of fire up the agonist, and the antagonist will let go, so we have reciprocal inhibition, and a lot of people have some nice outcomes with that stuff. I personally was helped by MAT, but this guy was not responding well to that. And so I decided to do the opposite. And this guy, what he couldn't do is when I put him on his belly in a prone position, he was like a turtle on his back. He couldn't extend from his neck, his T-spine, his lumbar spine, hips, arms, even he was stuck on his belly. So after a number of years of trying to empower the posterior chain to open this guy up, and that didn't work at all, I decided to flip him on his backside, and we kind of fed the anterior chain. And so it made no sense as to why here's this guy has flexibility and range of motion available in flexion. It made no sense for me to work on him that way. But the opposite wasn't working, 40, 50 sessions later, it wasn't getting anywhere. So when we fed some attention, I guess you could say, into the anterior chain, meaning cervical flexion as an isometric, capitis flexion as isometric, the jaw extension. I was thinking muscles at this time. I was thinking the anterior chain and just putting some low-grade intention there. The next day, the client calls me and tells me all his pain's gone. He's standing. I feel like I'm standing at like an inch or two taller. And he played golf that morning. And I always forget now, it's either 11 or 12 strokes. He beat his personal best playing golf. So, I mean, he went from, not breaking 90 or whatever. I think he shot, I forget. I think he hadn't broken 100 in a number of years, like over a decade. And I think he shot at 87 or 88. That's what it was. And so
you
I
need to work on me.
What's that?
You need to work on me. If it'll sell that right there. If you'll shave strokes, it's gold.
Man, it's so crazy. I mean, like some guys, like it's so profound, and sometimes it's not. But I was just fortunate. I wasn't. I was just taking a wild haymaker was what I was doing, and then I had this crazy result. So then right away, so sorry about this. It's taking me like 5 minutes to answer your simple question.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
So what we did is right away I recognized, like, oh my gosh, this understanding we have, or how we're interpreting these findings of range of motion restrictions, that has to be put on trial. Because most people, like, we're all kind of like, yeah, it makes sense. We're going to go after protective muscle guarding. And it's usually like, I'm going to empower the agonist, or I'm going to release the antagonist. And then those groups are fighting. But, like, dude, that's 2 hands on the steering wheel. One's pulling down, one's pulling up. The same thing. It's a force couple, essentially. So it's like they act like they're at odds, but they're actually the same. But the whole idea is, like, what if protective muscle guarding, you address that, and it's still, a person has crappy posture, or, garbage outcomes. And so when I took that opposite approach and it worked, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even trust the interpretations I'm coming up with based on just this visual observation of poor movement. So then I'm like, oh man, well, okay, that's cool. We got to put it on trial, but what does that look like? So then over the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I kept doing MAT on people because I'm like, wait, I stepped back a little bit. Like, look, I'm not hurting people with MAT, and 2 or 3 people getting great results. Like I don't have to totally abandon this right now. So I kept doing MAT, but my brain kept going back to that session with Al, and I just couldn't let it rest. Like, what the heck was that? 'Cause that was like the best session I ever had with somebody, and yet it made no sense, and it was totally at odds with, this philosophy that I was using on people. So all I did is I circled the wagons, and I decided, hey, what do I really know? So I wrote a list of different truths about the human movement system that all of us can agree on. I don't care if you're a Pilates person, you're an orthopedic surgeon, chiropractor, PT, whatever you are, strength coach, whatever. What are the things that we all agree on? So what are the points we don't need to disagree on? So it's like, okay, when we walk, there's opposite arm and leg swing. The ground is hard. Gravity is pulling us straight down. So I went through these ultra basic fundamental principles, and like, all right, this list is kind of unassailable. This is pretty solid. But then I'm like, everything beyond this list, and I think I had like 14 or 15 things on that list. I can't remember them all now. But I'm like, everything that's not on this list is open for discovery. So instead of falling into this camp or that camp, I'm intentionally, I'm going to tune off the industry, and I'm not going to read any more articles. I'm not going to watch any more videos, because I'm in some regards getting dumber or getting really more indoctrinated to a school of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I decided to sequester myself away, because I'm like, I got the skill set of muscle testing where I can get this binary response, this positive, negative response to questions that I pose in the body. And I'm going to just trust what every client's body tells me. So I just started going down that rabbit hole, and just thought, like, I'm not listening to the industry. Not that there's not good or bad, or not that there's something you can't learn, but it's hard to decipher between what's good and what's junk out there, when all you're doing is getting, kind of indoctrinated, like left and right. We're all getting hit with all these messages all the time. So I'm like, screw that. I'm gonna stay in my basement gym and just hang around with my friends and my family and my clients, and just let the evidence speak for itself, if you would.
So, I mean, again, there's tons of spots to dive in there. So I want to try to dissect this as thoroughly as I can, just again, for anybody listening, because my whole goal is to understand it. And that's what I'd hope anybody listening. And again, I say understand. I mean, this disclaimer, I've never taken one of your courses. I've never met you in person, seen you work somebody up. So like, I'm trying to understand from afar as both a possible consumer, but then also like somebody that works with patients every day, of knowing like, is this a arrow I want to put in my quiver? But we would even talk about, well, is it an arrow, or is it just, is it a different broadhead for the arrow, or, something like that. So my first question would be, if we're starting to dissect it, you had these kind of truths, which I think maybe you tell me if I'm wrong, maybe you were almost, we call it the curse of knowledge sometimes. Like, you have so much training, which could be indoctrination or just like a knowledge base, but it sounds like coming from, and I'm not demeaning this in any way, but a personal training background, you kind of like, hey, let's just be pretty basic. Like, these are human movement truths. Let's start there. You started working. So how did you even start to develop a framework? So you had these truths, but like, because the first question I would have is, we have, neurokinetic therapy, David Weinstock, and obviously applied kinesiology, clinical kinesiology. I mean, other systems that seem similar from the outside, like RPR and things like that. How did you start using your assessment, right? Muscle testing, or, a kinesiological approach with different inputs? Like, what was different? How'd you start toying around with it?
I love it. That's such a great question, man. Like, it's cool that like we haven't met, and like you're kind of coming into my little world ignorant, because it actually makes for really good questions. So I think this is actually really cool. This is perfect. Well, what I started doing is, I'm like, it's kind of like this humbling moment of, man, I really don't know much, so I want to know the ultra basics. Like, my thought was, I remember this one client said one time, like he was a HVAC guy, he was a heating, ventilation, air conditioning, not a technician in his own business, but he said to me one time, he was like, you'd have to know how the machine is supposed to work before you can fix it. And I'm like, what? Say that again. So I wrote it down, because that's the first time I ever heard it. I'm like, dude, that is brilliant. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I love basic truths, and nobody ever said that to me. So that was in my head. Like, I'm going to try to figure out what happens when the foot hits the ground. So that was the question that I kind of devised in my head. So I had this neural response testing, which is, I got it from MAT, but they got it from kinesiology. So it's a direct borrow there. So unintentionally, we have roots in kinesiology, I guess you'd say. But, and I don't know if I even knew that at the time. Like, I was still just like, hey, I just have the skills muscle testing. I've looked into some of the stuff more in depth since then. But what I started doing was like, okay, I want to understand what happens when the foot hits the ground. So I'm like, okay, but all my clients, I have them laying on their back on this table, that's not the foot hitting the ground. So what do I got to do? I'm like, all right. So I'm just thinking, it's so funny. It's like, it's so simple now, but at a time when there's nobody leading you and you just kind of come up with stuff, it's a different place. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to do is I'm going to imitate ground reaction forces at every joint in the body in all three planes of movement in two directions, right? So the 6 degrees of freedom. So I'm like, all right, we got to look at flexion and extension, adduction and abduction, internal rotation and external rotation, as simplistically as possible. I want to look at all those joint actions where I'm imposing that force onto the body. Because when we're upright and we're walking, your foot hits the ground hits back. That those forces are being transferred to the whole body. So all I started doing was I started imitating ground reaction forces at every single joint in the body, up and down the chain, 3 planes, both directions, and almost immediately it became apparent that, oh my gosh, there's this whole concept of locomotion, this pattern of gait is written on our software. Because what I would
Mm-hmm.
find is if I would bend the right toe into flexion, the proximal joint, and then I would go and check a reference muscle test, like it could have been an arm or a torso test, what have you, and it got strong. And then I'd go to the other side of the body, I'd go to the left toe, same exact joint action, flexion, I'd have this opposite negative response. I'm like, okay, am I imagining this? Like at first I'm like, is this like a tester, like, kind of self-fulfilling prophecy? So then I went to the second joint on toe right, flexion, solid, toe left, distal flexion, negative. I'm like, this is so weird. So I'm like, let's do the opposite. Let's go extension. So I did extension right, negative, extension left, positive. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is gait. And if it is gait, it should have happened in the upper body too. So then I would go to the fingers on the opposite side. So whatever I'd find in the lower right, right foot, left hand would have the same response, left foot, right hand. Like this is cross crawl, this is gait, ambulation, whatever you want to call it. So that's how I started playing with it. So it was really exciting, and then I felt like I was rewarded, like on the first person, like, whoa, this is weird. This is totally this gait here. This is so cool. So I was excited out of my mind on the first person, and then all I try to do is like, I'm trying to adhere to scientific principles. I'm now trying to prove myself wrong. So next person, I'm like, okay, I'm actually trying to get myself in a negative, pessimistic mindset of there's no way I'm gonna see the same thing in this next person, and then the next person was either the exact same or it was the polar opposite. But again, or maybe it was like left foot collapse with gravity positive and right foot overcome gravity positive, and all these reversals. So that's that's what I started doing. I just wanted to imitate ground reaction forces and then use this neural response test to gauge the responses that the nervous system would give you right away when you add these different inputs into the system.
And then again, from my understanding, which I'm pulling a lot from, as we mentioned, right up front, that Ben Greenfield kind of workup / podcast, from an intervention standpoint, because we basically just covered kind of the assessment systematic approach, very, 30,000 foot view. But to me, it seems like intervention is still, along the same lines of kind of MAT, right? You're going in, it's more of an isometric, specific load based on the testing. So just kind of give me a brief on that of like, well, what's intervention look like? Because I know there's on table, and then you did like movement specific, skill specific stuff.
Yep. So initially, obviously I came from the strong MAT background. So what I would do initially is, compare right side to left, not even right side, but, right foot hitting the ground versus left foot hitting the ground. So I now call it right step, left step, just that moment that the foot comes in contact with the ground during locomotion. And so what I'm looking for is like, where was the outlier? So I'd find out which joint action is, say the culprit, or we're expecting this positive response or this negative response. So let's just say if it was hip abduction as an example. So, all right, we're working somebody up. If it's left hip abduction, in those early days, I would then go right into MAT mode. I say, oh, it's hip abduction. So I would test all of the single, the names of the muscle tests. Glute minimus, glute maximus, glute medius, all those left hip abductors. Hold on 1 second. My dogs are barking. I'm going to let this guy into the room. 1 second. Sorry.
You're good.
Here we go. And so then I would, the ones that would fail, I would do an origin insertion palpation, get it fired up. Okay, that's cool. But then I'm like, after a couple of days, a couple of weeks, I'm like, what if it's more about position? Because I'm loading the body in these positions, and the nervous system isn't wired to have this interaction with one muscle. There's no muscle that exists that doesn't have other muscles that have a shared responsibility. So this whole idea of like a glute minimus test, is it really a glute minimus test, or is it just a test position that emphasizes those fibers? Because like you do a glute max test, what your opposite psoas isn't kicking in, your abdominals, of course it is. So the whole idea is like I wanted to get off this whole idea of muscles, because I think if you're trying to understand human movement through a muscular lens, you're really doing yourself a disservice. I think the industry needs to start thinking about movement as joint actions. Like your brain doesn't care about the names of muscles. It just knows I'm trying to create hip flexion or hip abduction on this left side right now. So I'm gonna recruit whatever's available right now for duty. So then I started using an isometric contraction, and so in my mind I started getting away from MAT at that point, because MAT uses isometrics a teeny bit. They mostly rely upon its origin, insertion, and palpation. Yeah. So I started using isometrics, and I was testing concentrics, eccentrics, and I settled on isometrics primarily because it was quickest. So instead of having to do like 5 hip abductions, concentric, eccentric, whatever, and it worked. I found if you just did an isometric for about 1.5, 2 seconds, it also got the job done. So that's we would find the culprit, find the joint action that's presently intolerant to load, and then just drive some motor output signals there through this through an isometric, and then just check her work. So I don't know if that answered your question necessarily.
Yeah. No. And again, it's I mean, it's like trying to explain a system that you've honed over the past, I don't know how many years. I mean, well over
about 15 now. Yeah, 15, so almost 15 and a half now, yeah.
And then as we, trying to distill it down into verbal communication, which sometimes, I mean, that's, I remember my first, FRC seminar when I went and saw Spina. It was kind of the same thing. You see this kind of like, oh, I kind of get what's going on. Then you go in there and you're like, oh, I understand it way better, even though from afar you think you know what's going on.
Right.
And that's a lot of things. I've heard you mention, again, in other interviews, the term neuromechanics. So I'm going to tell a kind of a dumb story on myself.
Okay.
When I first got into practice, I kind of, I've always been, I think, a really good integrator. So I was always looking for different things. And I was like, man, nobody's really kind of like putting all the pieces together. And I was like, dude, why? I'm going to make this thing called neuromechanics, not realizing that, Roger Anoka had written a book probably before I was born, the first edition. And I was like, oh, cool. Now it's on the 5th edition, which came out in 2015. And I was like, I made literally a logo. I was like, I'm going to start doing training like this. Like, what an idiot. And then I went and found this giant textbook. So I've heard you mention neuromechanics as a basis, right? Because you're looking at basically joint reactions and maybe a positional bias, but we're looking at it in an integrated movement pattern.
Yes.
So
well said.
From the standpoint of, and again, all these questions are literally coming from a place of not being a contrarian, but trying to understand.
Oh, yeah.
Novelty can be quite a hard thing to understand with the human body. So you can literally, rub somebody's earlobe and you will get a change in like a straight leg raise.
Yeah.
So how did you, as you were going through this process, how did you reconcile that, like, putting a big toe into extension was having this, this effect, but at the same time, it wasn't just novelty, which would be, I mean, the complexity of the human body is astounding. And then to think that we're going to start to create a map around, test outcome, and then intervention outcome. How did you even start to, create that kind of systematic approach?
I think it just more revealed itself. So as I'm going through the body and shoving each joint, deflection check, extension check, adduction check, abduction check, internal rotation check, external rotation check, what I start seeing is that, these positive, negative response, it was very, it's very cohesive in that all of the pronation actions like flexion, adduction, and internal rotation would have a similar response at that one particular joint. So again, if let's just say right hip, if we did right hip flexion, positive muscle test response, like a nice strong response, adduction strong response, internal rotation strong response. If I would then go to the left hip, those same 3 actions would have all negative responses, but then the opposite of abduction, extension, and external would have a positive response. So if you were to do this over the pick a person and go up and down the whole kinetic chain and literally load them up into 100 joint actions that relate to right step, left step. So if you did all rights, all lefts, what you're going to find is with one of those two, either right or left on this person, every single joint action is going to elicit a negative response. And then in the primarily or predominantly positive response, there's going to be an outlier or 7. So there's like 1, 2, 3, a handful that have this negative response. So then I would use those negatives as where we'd intervene. And also, what would happen is, as soon as you intervene at one of those negatives, that polar opposite, that mirror image opposite pattern that was all negatives now become positive. So then it's like almost like it's trying. It feels very much like you're at the fuse box hitting the fuse, or it's Christmas strand of Christmas tree lights and one bulb goes out. If you give that nervous system, that person's body, input that relates to those negative responses within that positive strand, good things would happen. So that's how we would check our work. Is like if it doesn't bring back positives across the board, it wasn't what the nervous system needed. So if we would ascertain again, we'll use the example if I found left hip abduction as the issue, but I would feed that person's body hip extension on left side or hip external rotation, it wouldn't get the job done. It wouldn't create this whole positive scenario. The nervous system has very, very, very specific needs is what we found. So just through trial and error, we found that. So it's almost like the checks and balances are built into the exploration process that it was on that I undertook. So I don't know if that quickly answers or quite answers the question, but it's like if you give basically in a nutshell, if you give the nervous system what it needs, it's like boom, everything at least temporarily comes back into a positive homeostatic relationship, right versus left, up versus down, and then at that point, instead of saying, "Oh, look, this person's perfect," which is never going to be the case, we would then challenge the nervous system, whether it's breathing or walking or perform an exercise you might do at the gym, or if you're a chiropractor, it might be a mobilization, or if you're a PT, it might be hook up electric stim, or whatever your interventions are. We would use these interventions then to find out what breaks the system. So I use this analogy all the time of I feel very much like I'm putting Humpty Dumpty back together again when we're working with people. So I think with score one, we can find the crack really quickly and we can patch it up really quickly. But then we put Humpty Dumpty up on a wall and then we push them off. And then we just register, okay, did it create a crack? No. Let's go to a higher challenge, push them off the wall, get the crack, put it back together again. So it's this whole, there's this innate built in within the system that check and balance of there needs to be a homeostasis between right versus left, up versus down, where there's no neurological preference between up versus down, right versus left. And that's how we get a little bit, I always call it temporary homeostasis, because if I throw enough of a challenge at you, I'll be able to break you.
When I don't want to skip ahead to this yet, but since you're kind of talking about it, this is one of my big questions, and I know you've addressed it on other shows, is, and I'm not, again, like you, I'm not calling out anybody's other stuff, but like some of these kind of like test input things, the big call out from an industry standpoint is the temporary nature of it. Well, yeah, you had 100%. A neurologic input, it's temporary. From what I'm picking up, which I wanted to dive into this later, I'm just addressing it for people listening. It sounds like the way that you're breaking the temporary barrier is just constant challenge, which we could also call graded exposure, whatever fancy term we would have put on it, with the same system at hand. And then to kind of go back to my initial question, it sounds like without the framework of, whatever you want to call it, like, a cross crawl pattern, just human locomotion, without that framework, it would have been harder to work through the process because that was the heuristic of which it was built. So it wasn't just muscle testing in isolation of everything's got to be perfect. It was, testing is, again, we said like we would say is probably the most, it is the most kind of thumbprint movement of human movement. I mean, that's why like the Chinese government is putting more money into locomotion registering rather than like eye identification, especially with like robots and things like that.
Oh, that's interesting. I've not heard that. That's crazy. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so they're pumping something. It was in my book. I don't know. It's something like $5 billion. Around 10 or 12 years ago, they started pumping money into gait recognition versus like eye and biometrics because they knew that was a better representation of an individual.
Interesting. So all the people who are trying to escape China, they need to get some square one. We'll alter their pattern. They'll never be recognized again.
Well, here's the interesting thing. When you look at that literature, you can't. It's like if you do a forgery test. Yes. So they'll have you can try to write different. Doesn't matter.
Oh, that's so crazy.
So there are things.
Man, I want to get my hands on whatever they're using and see.
Yeah.
Like I love hearing these things. I was like, oh man, can we challenge that? I like trying to break things and put it back together. That's pretty cool.
Because like when we're teaching, I teach with a lot of running and gait things. We always say that gait is the highest level integrative pattern that is kind of hardwired to you. So let's say I get an on-table change, right? Internal rotation of your hip. We improve passive range of motion. Now, if I don't see that expressed in something like gait, that doesn't mean I did a bad job, but it probably doesn't mean it's gonna, I'm air quoting, stick as well because you're not integrating it into just the baseline pattern of walking.
I love it.
And I don't expect that sometimes on the first visit. Like you haven't had a hip that doesn't move a certain way for years. I don't know if your, parietal cortex is just going to be like, yeah, cool, I'm going to use that today. So because I know there's a lot of clinicians, I'm going to try to ask the questions that I think people would be like, okay, what about this?
Yeah.
When we're doing testing the nervous system using strength, right, or some semblance of strength, maybe we're not using a graded scale 1 to 5.
Okay.
How do you suss out legitimate neurologic pathoanatomical, damage? So if somebody has, neuroforaminal changes, or they've had, paracentral disc lesion, and they're literally having neuromotor deficit. Obviously, you're going to pick up weakness in all areas, but as you said, you could pick that up, and that's just something. Is it like, well, nothing's working, they're still presenting with gross weakness, and it just kind of fails out of the system? Or do you have another assessment so you're making sure that you're ruling out true neurologic pathology versus just kind of the systemic, irritant or whatever you call it, peripheral, central sensitization?
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of questions right in there. So
Yeah.
let's hold on to that one in case I miss a part of it. But I would say, to answer your last question first, I don't have another functional exam that rules those things out, is number one. Back to the first part, when we're doing muscle testing, we're using neuro response muscle testing, not force production testing. So we're not looking at that. I mean, we can mess with some of the force production stuff as a baseline. We want to see change and as a way to illustrate to the client or the patient or the athlete. But we're using more of a neuro response form of testing. So it's a 50-50, either passes or fail. And then as far as what we've found is, I kind of, since I'm not a licensed medical person, I don't think like medical people. So I don't care what these things are called. And it's almost better for me not to know and have in my head like, well, this guy has this or that. Like, well, if he fell off his motorcycle yesterday, I'm hoping you went and saw a medical person to rule out that there's hardware damage. So the only thing I do at the beginning is I just make sure there hasn't been recent trauma that I need to be careful with. Because if there's a recent trauma that hasn't been inspected by someone who is a hardware expert, I'm like, look, I need you to go see, a PT who's focused on orthopedics, or a doc, or someone, just rule that out. But then if there is some underlying neurological condition, I don't care what the name of it is. I think sometimes what ends up happening is, I don't think this is what does happen, is when we can't get closure. So we have this right versus left comparison, and we find a joint action that is right now lacking really motor output signals, but it's really because it's lacking sensory input signals from those mechanoreceptors and all the different receptors that are part of that joint action, or that eye position, or that head position. So if there's a lack of sensory input coming into the system, then you have the black box of the brain trying to process all the stuff to create this best, most efficient, most optimal motor output signals. If there's a gap in that and we can't close it, that's pretty strong evidence that there's a deep neurological issue that we're not going to be able to help very well. So as an analogy or as examples, we've worked with not a huge number of people that have had strokes, but it's been over a dozen now, and I'm gonna say 8 to 10 times out of 12, very like, oh my gosh, like massive changes in things like gait, getting out of chairs. I mean, really obvious. People that were using walkers don't need a walker anymore. But I did have 2 or 3 people that have had strokes that I worked with, and I couldn't detect any change whatsoever. So to me, that tells me I'm not even sure exactly which parts of the brain square one is having the most impact on, but I suspect that those people that have those, whatever type of stroke they had or neurological deficit, if it's in those centers that were impacted with square one and there's no change, that tells me like, yeah, man, this probably isn't gonna, we're never gonna get a good result with square one with that person. They need, or our stuff is a secondary, tertiary, and quaternary thing. Like, no, there's some other stuff you need to maybe address first before you come back and see us. So what I really wish I had, hindsight's always 20/20. I really wish every time I've worked with someone who had a stroke, I wish I would have asked more questions.
So you knew where the lesion was.
Yeah, because it would probably help us narrow down like what.
Well, in my mind was going to chronicity, right? The what stage of like neurogenesis, because we know all this stuff is for the most part you're able to, your spinal cord is healing, your brain is healing. It's just so incredibly slow that we don't recognize it. So if you got somebody 20 years into a stroke, even though the the movement pattern in the software is changed and like it might be a hardcore pattern, it's probably easier to change that than somebody that maybe is only 6 months out from a stroke where they literally
Maybe.
don't have the possibility to rewrite that software, the hardware as easily. I don't
Yeah.
know, you know?
It could be. It could be because I know that one of the biggest changes we had, that lady had her stroke about 4.5 years prior. Um, yeah, it could be. That could be because I'm thinking the tooth state of my head, like man, there was not a big change. They were definitely a little more fresh. So maybe it isn't even a part of the brain. It could be. It could be the timing. It
Yeah.
could be that. I had not thought about that. So that's an interesting insight there because I know the two that there was no change. They were both inside of 6 months for sure on the one. The other one's I can't recall if he was 3 months post stroke or a year. They're both definitely inside of year one after having a stroke.
Yeah.
And I can think of like two or three specific ones that had a pretty profound impact. They were definitely both over 2-3 years. So that's interesting. So I'd never thought about that before, Doc. That's awesome.
Well, and I also heard this. I'm sorry to keep referencing Ben Greenfield's podcast, but that was the biggest explanation I saw in working fashion. He asked the question. He goes, "Well, how do you explain this?" He goes, "You know, what area is being affected? What's going on here?" Which is a question that everyone is going to want to know from a clinical standpoint because A, we're nerds.
Yeah.
B, we want to try to have an evidentiary, substantiation of like what we're doing. So I know that the answer there, and again, I'll let you fill in the gaps here, was, I don't really know, just kind of the results. Like we know that we're kind of getting this outcome, and as long as that outcome is present, like, okay, the further you've gone, I mean, are you trying to kind of backwards, hey, what am I affecting? Is this, cerebellar integration? Am I affecting, is this, subcortical processing? Do you want to know that? Or are you still kind of like, hey man, if I have an outcome that speaks for itself and that outcome lasts for, a period of time that, you and the client are happy with, are you still okay with that? Or are you trying to go back and see like, what is going on? How to substantiate this?
I'm going to sit the fence on this one. Like I look at it at this point, and it could be, our vision is what our vision is. At this point, I don't personally see knowing which lobe or which part of the brain that we're affecting. I just don't know what that's going to do to change what I'm doing clinically. So therefore, I'm such a practical person. I don't see the value in that, nor do I believe that I have the background to be the person who's going to figure that out. So it's like, okay, I don't know that that's going to help me personally, and even what I'm relaying to the students we're teaching.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know if I'll have the background, but at the same time, I'm very open. Like I'm always very open to having relationships with people who have a deeper understanding. So I'm very open to a partnership with somebody like you, maybe, or someone else who might be listening. Hey, I'm going to try to help you figure this out. Like I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But that's going to be something that you're. Look at that background there, that little firework.
Yeah, the thumbs up. You never know what's going to happen. Yeah.
That's so great. Let's do more crazy stuff and see if we get some more responses here. There's that motor output signal from the app. Here's the sensory input. But I feel very open to people who are interested in what we're doing and they want to do some research and they want to do a deeper dive and help us come up with that. I'm very, very open to that. I personally. It's like, hey man, could you could you do this 360 dunk? Like, I'm not going to waste time on doing that because that's just not in the cards for me. So it's like, I don't think I'm going to be the person who solves that. But very open to people who are interested in this stuff and say, hey, this is kind of cool stuff. You have these consistent outcomes, so that's cool. But what's really going on? Back to me, where the rubber meets the highway, not a single client or patient whoever's going to see me is going to give a crap about, hey, is it the prefrontal cortex? Like, they don't care, and I really kind of don't personally. But I like the idea of someone digging in and doing that with us so that it would create even more of a bridge between where we're at and where maybe the mainstream is. And if that explanation would create a better bridge for a broader audience, that's great. I think that'd be amazing. So I see the value more in that relationship side between me and other practitioners more than it's going to do anything like in the trenches for me.
Yeah, and I appreciate that answer. I mean, it's a truthful answer, which I love that you're like, hey, it's not me. If it's somebody else, awesome, but it's an open door. Like, hey, it's kind of like, come see what is going on. Like, I'd love to know, but I'm not going to do it. And like, that's kind of the reason. I mean, I've done, over the past 10 years, this is the third iteration of this podcast. And the only reason I do it now is like the questions I have. And, I just had Steve Capobianco on, and we just like nerded out for almost 2 hours on, trigger points, because it's this ephemeral thing that people are like, do they exist? Yes, they exist. Well, what's causing them? And a lot of people be like, it doesn't matter. I can treat them and I can improve pain outcome. But my take would be, the better you, just like, I can't remember who said it to you, that you have to understand the machine.
My HVAC guy.
The better you understand, the better outcomes you will have, because now maybe those 2 or 3 stroke patients that you didn't have success with, you will, because it's either better triage to somebody else, or the system has, different, whys in the road that you could take. And I love doing that in our profession, because honestly, here's a crazy one. Nobody still knows why joint restrictions occur. Nobody knows why trigger points occur. They're obviously real phenomena, but nobody knows. Yet we treat those things every day, and that seems it just seems crazy. They're like, nobody knows.
So especially something like the trigger points. I mean, because that's like, it's so pervasive. It's so wild to me. And so what you say about trigger points and something else you had just mentioned. Oh crap!
Joint restrictions that
nobody has an understanding of joint restrictions. They don't just like a neurological control issue where the brain like throttles back and governs things. Because we're seeing restriction change all the time.
Yeah, well, the two, and we won't go too far tangent, but I'm just a nerd. So the two big theories on joint restriction are motor control, right? You're from a muscular neurologic standpoint, you're either creating a stabilization point, or whatever, you create a compensation. The other one is I wouldn't say it's far flung, but it's kind of interesting, is this meniscoid hypothesis, that you're literally using small pieces of fibrocartilage to kind of change the joint mechanics as you deal with an injury or some sort of derangement. The reason that came about is they literally put people under general anesthesia, and the joint restriction would still be present.
Interesting.
It's kind of wild. Yeah. So nobody knows.
What if it's a combination of the both? I mean, it's like a motor control and structural maladaptation.
100%. And that's, again, once you know the answer to something like that, if you can ever know the answer, which is, the maybe. I mean, man, now you can be a sniper with everybody, because you're like, this is this one, this is this one. And I just don't know if that's in the cards, but I would hope we're all kind of pushing for it.
What's funny you say with snipers, I feel like we're a sniper already. So I don't know, but you did give a couple examples of like a few people that we weren't able to help with stroke. Yeah, there's so few and far people that don't respond to this, and it's like, if we even get the answer. So my thought is like, man, like, I'm gonna go back to my original answer. I would love a guy like you who seems to know quite a bit about all the neural principles and whatnot. Like if someone out there is very interested, like I want to deep dive into this stuff, like. Yeah, please reach out. I'm very. I'm looking for partners in different capacities. But for the reason
we have a ton of clinicians listening. So anybody listening, we'll obviously at the end of the show or in the show notes, we'll put Shawn's contact, and he'll email you back sooner than he did me. I promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm joking.
I agree. Yes. I promise.
So something that you'd mentioned, and this again, that interview with Ben was 3 years ago. So I know this is way more honed and cleaned up. So we've talked a lot about, mechanical neurologic inputs, and then the challenge, right? Kind of trying to break Humpty Dumpty again, and kind of getting this kind of edification of it as you go through these, processes. I know in that one, you even started going into, things that he did through his day, but then also psycho-emotional inputs, like which kind of you see this played around with a couple different concepts. You're like, hey, just think about fear. And then he visualized what was fearful, and then you thought about something that was, love or positive. And we know that affects change, within movement and other things, within our environment. So where is that, because I'm also we've had Eric Cobb on this podcast and people like that. So what's that evolved to now? So what, does it look wildly different than it did, 5 years ago? Is it relatively the same, or, how have you integrated that?
Honestly, I'd say it looks generally the same. Like when we teach people the Square One, system, there's a bit of ability to be creative with it. So we have the framework, right versus left, up versus down. We have all the joint actions, all the eye actions, and all the head actions mapped out. That's set. But then where the customization comes into is that individual practitioner and whoever's in front of them at that moment. So there is some flexibility and freedom to, which way do you want to drive this thing? I've been in the process last year of having not a customized, but a standardized list of, hey, here's trigger one, here's trigger two, here's trigger three, and that's mostly to get people up and running, because I think a lot of times people learn our stuff and we're throwing so much at them, and I just think it's gonna help them get a better result quicker.
Framework.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, exactly. So even like a triggering framework. So I'm always in my mind. I don't care if you put the top athlete on the planet, whoever that person is right now, who's uninjured and nobody can find something wrong. Which like that tough person to find a crack in their drywall. Or you give me someone who like, hey, they're 6 weeks post op bilateral hip replacement or something crazy. So to me, I don't care. I almost don't care about their story. I know they need to be able to breathe. I know they need to be able to get upright. I know they need to be able to get on and off the toilet. I need to know if they live in a house where they're going on steps. There's some basic activities of daily living that across the board, if I have at least a half hour or an hour with a person, I'm going after the most basic human movement patterns that we all have to express on a day-to-day basis. I'm starting there. And then as we clear out getting upright, breathing, walking around the room a little bit, up and down a couple steps. Once that doesn't trigger the nervous system, then it's like, okay, tell me about your most recent. Like a lot of times people come in, my back hurts, my hip hurts, my shoulder hurts. They get the whole laundry list of what's going on, and I'll start customizing it to the most recent expression of pain. So if it's a shoulder, like, okay, tell me, do you go to the gym? Yeah, okay. What other activities you're avoiding in the gym? So I'm listening for what they're cognizant of that they're actually avoiding, and I'll start customizing it to stuff that they actually know that they're avoiding, because that's a massive mental, that's a black hole in their mind a little bit. That's like a vacuum they're going to suck down into. So I'll start very general, and then I just kind of through the interview process, getting to know them. I'll start customizing it to their most recent ache and pain, or if it's an athlete, like, okay, you know your body pretty well. Is it cutting right, cutting left? What are the things that you're being held back? And I won't tell anybody. I won't tell your opponents. I'm not going to put it out there. But I'll try to find out what they know they're holding, what they're throttling back on, and then I start gearing it that way. So, but even that's there's still some flexibility within the system that a person can do that. But I really want to have a standardized list of triggers that at least gives all of our students, hey, here's the first 20 things that I use on a consistent basis with everybody. And then from there, it's kind of comes down to you and your client and where you guys want to drive this thing.
Well, I think that's awesome because we talk about that a lot. That one of the courses I teach is called Art of the Assessment, because literally we get taught how to do a high level exam in school, yet you get out and you could do that same exam. It doesn't tell you a whole lot, and then you have to create a really strong system of audits and kind of what you're going back and forth to. Otherwise, you're literally you get to the end of the exam and you're like, I don't even know where I'm supposed to intervene, let alone like really knowing what's going on. So I agree 100%. Now, once you learn the system, your goal as a practitioner should be to break the system for a patient or for yourself, and like kind of hone it and play with it.
That's it. It's like ethically break the system. Like there's some people who come in 8-10 times. I'm like, okay, like all the little basic things don't get them. Like it's like I'm always trying to get pushed to how do I ethically break this person without like actually putting them in harm's way? Because like you get some people so robust, like at some point I'm going to push you down the steps, man, because I'm running out of ideas here. You know what I mean? But we haven't done that yet, so we have not resorted to anything super crazy. But
what it comes back to, I always say the way that we break the system is you break it against, like if we're the waves crashing on the rocks are first principles. The first principles for you were that, that 14, 15 list of human movement truths.
Yeah.
So we're echoing the same thing. Me being the questioner, I try to tell students, hey, you have basically 5 core sciences, right? Physiology, physics, anatomy, biochemistry. You have to break things, like your system. You have to take Shawn's system. If you went and took a course, even if you're an evangelist, you're like, this is working. Your job is to break it on the rocks over and over, break it. You're like, yeah, I might be getting results, but why? Is it me? Because some people have a profound effect on people, and that's hard to extrapolate. Like your personality, all these things are so like, I always question myself, like, if I could just be a blank canvas of a personality, would I get the same results?
Totally neutral.
I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Right.
It's impossible, but it's fun to think about.
It is.
The thing I wanted to jump back into that we mentioned earlier is give me a bit of a rundown. And I know this is going to be very hard because it's N = 1, but like somebody comes in with, hip, low back pain.
Yeah.
How many times are you usually seeing them? How long do we expect results to work? I know you mentioned in the Ben Greenfield thing, these are all in the same realm of working towards a self kind of test reset system. So what's it look like from like in clinic care with somebody to at home stuff? Like what do we expect? How long should this
Awesome.
last?
That's great. So nuts and bolts at the practicality of it. When someone gets a hold of me, and let's just say, I don't know how you define an adult, but I'm gonna say someone's 25 or older, 30 or older. They've been around the block a few times. I usually am trying to get them into a 3-session package on the front end.
Okay.
And it's very, very, very common that there's a mitigation or even a total elimination of their pain within the first session. It's pretty uncommon that there's not 80, 90, 100% mitigation of their symptoms within 2. So I would say 80 or 95%, somewhere between 80 and 90% of the time, after 2 sessions, it's almost like, I'm feeling so good. Why am I even coming in for 3? But I have that third one there just because every once in a while you do get a person that's like, wow, they've stepped in more potholes than the average person. But usually at those first 2 sessions, I'm starting to use that third session as a maintenance session. So very frequently I'll come in, first session, I don't know, like honestly, probably 60 or 70% of people I work with, their pain is already starting to drop pretty massively in the first session. By the end of session 2, again, we're probably 80 or 90% of people are feeling great. So for those people who are doing really well after 2 sessions, and those first 2 sessions are usually about a week apart, typically. Then for session 3, it's like, hey, let's if things are going well, why don't we schedule out 4 weeks out, 6 weeks out? Now give me a call if it doesn't last that long. Like, hey, 2 weeks out, you start feeling like garbage again. Get a hold of me. We'll try to get you back in quicker. And then usually during that third session, I do teach them a little system that is going to become another course that we're going to put out, an online course, and probably like a 1-day workshop around it. And it's all geared around upright balance and kind of using this writing mechanism, this herky jerky response to balance challenges in lieu of a muscle test. So what's cool about that is it's going to remove a lot of the skill that's required to run square one. So it's going to be great for practitioners who are just want to dip their toes in our waters a little bit and not have a huge investment of time to acquire this muscle testing skill thing. It's great already with our clients because they don't have to learn a skill. They just have to put themselves into certain postures. They find the challenge, and then we have a couple of resets they could use, either stimulating the tragus, the vagus nerve through the tragus, which is an ear rub. You can do different head positions with some nasal breathing. So we have here's these certain head positions. If you do all of these, it actually covers 16 different presentations of positive, negatives, of up, down, right, left. So we got to teach them this little thing that they can do on their own at home. But a lot of us are kind of lazy, and when the pain goes away, people aren't very into doing their homework because they feel good enough. So then I usually say, hey, if you're not going to do the homework, make sure you give me a call 1 day before the pain comes back, and that's probably the next time I want to see you. So if you can predict that, that'd be a great time to see me. So that's kind of usually how we work through how that looks like, clinically and from a practitioner to a client standpoint.
Okay. So in our world, because we always say this, obviously this isn't an unreal scenario. We always try to say that I want to be abject to somebody's pain when they come in. I mean, that'd be ideal world, right? Like I know they're coming in for pain, but my job is to look at function, how function changes in the face of pain not changing or not, because we know chronic pain and all these changes that occur. So two scenarios, but same question. Yeah. Somebody gets out of pain after the first visit, 100% alleviation.
Yes.
But they come in, what are you looking at? Obviously, I know what we talked about, the assessment. Is it the same stuff? So if everything tests positive, or you're like, dude, you're good. Or they're 100% out of pain and you're like, hey, stuff's still not testing. Or are you still working? Or how big is pain a mechanism? And then I'll ask the second question.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how important pain is to that person. So it's like, I think all the times, and this is maybe not a direct answer, not that I'm trying to avoid it. I'm thinking if I have a pro athlete.
That's my next question.
Okay,
so let me just say that and then use this however you want. If somebody comes to you without pain, what are you doing?
Okay, if their pain is gone,
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's so crazy, like 3 minutes in, and even then I'm like kind of rubbing my eyes, like I kind of don't believe, like, is it really this easy? But probably 10 or 20% of the time, it is that easy, right? We give them a little bit of organization, and they're already out of pain. The thing is, I still want to check out daily challenges that I know that they're going to face. So if they can't withstand going up and down steps, like, well, hey man, this pain thing could be coming back in a day or three because I didn't prepare your nervous system for those challenges. So I think I have some reasonable challenges that I want to run them through. Now, if they're feeling out of pain and I got them through reasonable challenges and they're happy enough with that, I'm like, okay, let's not even, we have that third session or that's, two more sessions, whatever. We can leave it open ended as when we get together. Because like I give people a year to use those 3 sessions. So I said, just remember, you have a year to use it. But if you're really doing that well and we pushed your boat in the right direction, our winds pushed in the right direction, that's great. I'm not trying to burn through these unnecessarily with you. But if someone has no pain change, and we're burning through these different challenges and they're holding up well, then I'm starting to think square one in this whole restoration of software around getting up and locomotion. This isn't their primary driver. So they're going to have to go see a practitioner who has a totally different set of goggles. Maybe it's a tissue person. Maybe it's someone that's deeper neurological understanding. They're like, yeah, there's something going on here. It's a little freaky that's beyond my pay grade. Yeah.
Well, in the world of like, let's say pro golf, very common that somebody's always looking for like an edge from like a movement. So what do you do if somebody's coming to you, no pain at all? We're not talking a pain scenario. Are you using the same systematic approach with that person?
Yeah, totally. So I'll use the same systematic approach, and specifically if somebody like a golfer, I'll still take them through like, all right, clear out some basic breathing patterns, clear out some walking, just the basic stuff, and then we like, okay, I'll ask them to bring their whole bag of clubs with them, and so I just want you to hold these implements because these implements, these tools that you're using in your sport, you had to mechanically fit to your body. But I want to make sure there's a good neuro fit. So I want you to just grab your clubs, and so many times just holding it, and it's the weight of the whole implement and the thickness, and don't have to swing it. I'll have to go through their whole bag of clubs and almost every one of their clubs in their bag. And it could just be the novelty of it. It'll have this negative response in the nervous system, and then we'll clear it out. Now, every once in a while, you get one club that, like, it'll trigger them 5 times, 10 times, and it doesn't mean not to use the club. We just have to play with it a little bit, create some more organization around that specific device. Because I'm never trying to take away what they're doing and what they're happy with. So if they're seeing a massage person, or they're going to a chiropractor, or they're whatever, I'm that's great. I want to support that, but we want to use those inputs that they're receiving in their sport or their other therapies, and we'll make sure that their nervous system is more accepting of those things. So I'm never, hey, you can't do that. I don't see it good and bad. I see what dictates good and bad is that person's individual neurological response, and it's not set in stone. It's very malleable. So my job is to get it where the nervous system is so robust it can handle all those inputs and take it in stride. So that's what we're trying to do. Whether it's pro athlete or the other end of the spectrum.
Well, here's a question I hadn't thought about until you said that. So like again, in pro golf, it's very, we hear kind of horror stories about this. Somebody gets adjusted. They don't get hurt, but they're like, dude, that changed how I moved and I played like crap. Now, whether that's true or not, like
could be coincidence. It could have been. Yeah,
yes,
who knows?
But do you find using your system that if somebody is seeing, a PT chiro massage therapist, that the inputs that they're receiving from that person seem to be a consistent negative effect on that person from your testing?
Yeah, initially in the first couple sessions, but then if I can replicate what they're receiving, I'm not going to replicate a joint mobilization because it's not my area. But
it still comes down to stimulus response. So the stimulus is still the input.
It's very specific.
Okay.
Because give me like a pro athlete and something that might not even be triggering you and I might get them. Like if you just swipe their face, but that correlate what they got punched in the face a few times. Like that might have a bigger, nastier response than it does to you or I, as an example. Yeah. So it is so specific. But a lot of those things I'll find out, hey, what are you doing? Like, look, okay, sounds like she's doing good work or whatever. Hey, where'd she work on last night? Oh, she was rubbing my hamstring or whatever. And sometimes various degrees of what they can explain happened anyway. So like I'll just try to get some intel. And I'll try to replicate that stuff. And so that when they go to see their manual therapist, it has it's not usually a long-term tripping us up. Sometimes the first couple sessions, and I'm always trying to handle it delicately. And like they have some trust in this person. And I think the person's probably doing good stuff. I really think what they need to do is learn my system so that
Mhm.
they can actually cut me out of the loop, and that's fine by me. But yeah, my job is to support what these other professionals are doing and get the client's nervous system so robust that it can tolerate all those things. So
Yeah.
initially, yeah, it has a little bit of negative response, but it's usually not a. I can't recall a time where I've said, "Hey, I need you to stop seeing this person." Like
Yeah.
that, I doubt that's. I can't. I think that would stand in my head that I said that to somebody. I boy, I don't think I've ever said that to anybody. Like, no, no, no. I want to support what they're doing. They're doing good work. Let's support them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a good way to wrap up what we said before, or, kind of come back to like the graded exposure piece. So you're just saying that's another input.
Yeah,
Yeah. If you put a massive neurologic input of, blowing up somebody's cervical spine, from an
yeah,
adjustment standpoint, we think always positive because, increased range of motion, decreased pain. But at
yeah,
the same token, that's novel. Maybe you can't integrate that new motion very well, or
mm,
new movement pattern, and then neurologically you're still kind of behind the eight ball, and you're
mm.
just saying, well, we're trying to kind of, it's like if you're afraid of tarantulas, well, like put a tarantula 10 feet away from them and then 5 feet, and then eventually
Yeah,
they
yeah,
can
yeah.
crawl over
Exposure
them.
kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah, so I like that. uh
yeah.
is
And
there
back to you think
anything,
about
yeah, go ahead.
golf, and I think we were getting into, does it temporarily throw their game off? I don't know.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's funny is the first. Yeah, I was on staff with the Chicago Cubs for 3 years now. It's the year after Sammy Sosa was there. So I think it was '04 to '09, or maybe it was '03 to '09. I think it was '04 to '09. And what I was always watching for, I'd always document who I worked on. And
Hmm.
in his early years, it was MAT. My last year with the Cubs was now Square One. It didn't have a name then, but I was running the system on them in 2009. And what I was always watching for was I would look at their stats that day, 1 day later, 2 days later. So I was looking at what would happen. And it was crazy. It was, I probably worked on, in those years, probably 60, 70, 80 different baseball players.
Hmm.
And we had one guy that whenever I'd work on him, his stats would tank. And the staff didn't know it. The player didn't know it. But I was watching, like, crap. So I actually pulled him aside one day. I said, dude, listen, I want to help you. We're helping with this pain thing. But you literally, like, you play like crap the day I work on you. So, and this guy was like kind of bouncing between AAA and the major league club. So he'd be up half a season, up and down. So I said, look, man, I want to do whatever I can to support you reaching your dream of being a career MLB guy. And so I just said, hey, like, I want to work on you. But if you know you're starting that day, just we'll shake hands, but I'm not working on you that day. So out of 50, 60, 70 guys, we had one guy that he would tank. No, the other guys, it was rarely neutral. It was almost always a big performance spike. I mean,
Hmm.
crazy numbers that if I would tell people, they would think I'm making the stuff up. I mean, it was like, rocket fuel, the trite sayings of it. It was like steroids. It was like one of those deals where we really, really kind of supercharged these guys. And so then one thing, we're looking at some different functional outcomes, and we're looking at visual acuity, peripheral vision. We're looking at mobility. We're looking at mobilities, balance, grip dynamometer test. So it's interesting. What we've been seeing, the one that has been like the division stuff changes like almost everybody across the
Hmm.
board. Better visual acuity. It's pretty remarkable actually. Like over 90%. Like 13 of the first 15 people I did it on, they're reading one or two lines better on a Snellen eye chart. It had nothing to do with like eye triggers. It was literally just walking backwards, like just
Hmm.
basic movements, and it made them see better. But grip, man, it's been all over the place. Like sometimes it goes down a little bit. Sometimes it's neutral. Sometimes there's a right versus left discrepancy. That gets closer and more robust. Sometimes that gets closer and drops. But then we test them the next day, and it is better. So it seems like that sometimes on some people that expression of strength,
Hmm.
it hasn't fully integrated. So it's interesting. So for years, just a gut instinct of mine in the early years was, hey, when we're done with the session, like where my little studio gym is in Chicago, and it's in a very, very nice neighborhood. So I'll tell people, hey, when we're done with our session, could you just take a walk around the block? So I just wanted to help them integrate things better. So I wondered if we're testing this grip dynamometer deal, if they just need either time or they need, hey, could you go do a couple deadlifts for us? Something that would spur on a better integration thing.
Yeah.
So we do see sometimes that drops. And it's weird with hitters, baseball hitters, collegiate and pros, exit velos. It's crazy. Like, for whatever reason, that actually seems to spike right after a session. like without even having to wait for it, which is like, oh, that's so weird. That seems close enough to the strength and, power and strength are so closely related. So it's weird how that expression of exit velos go, it actually increases. So we're still messing around with like power, like some field tests we can assess power and strength. But there seems to be sometimes with strength, it's like, it's kind of unpredictable what's going to happen. And in that very short term, again, you check it an hour or three later, then it's good. But in that immediate moments after a session, sometimes it does dip. And what versus most of everything else we're testing, it's kind of either neutral to climbing. So
that is interesting, especially that you think of like exit velocity, like that's power, so that's the expression of speed and strength like together.
Right.
So like that has it's kind of.
But wonder if we're just getting like almost like a coordination piece or something.
Right. Yeah. Motor control is the
sequencing of the pattern or something, something along those lines is what and also we see like we've had a couple people with like force plates. I don't have one of those at my gym, but we're seeing stuff with just weight distribution that becomes better right away. So there may be a better balance, better coordination, even if the strength is down, there's still a better exit velo. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
And that's the stuff I love nerding out on.
Oh, I do too. I can't wait.
I think you can backwards extrapolate from the highest end, right? You work with a pro athlete and you see this stuff. You're like, oh man, if I can change 1% or 0.5% there, I can change 40% in an elderly person with a balance issue.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's fun playing on the extremes. Pro athletes and grandma just had hip replacement. I like the extremes because you can see, because either one of them, you make them 1 or 2% better, and it's like, whoa, it's like it can be like life changing for them. It's the guy in the middle who never finds us anyway because we're cash based. So a guy who just sits around has no pain. He's not looking for me anyway. So I don't get a lot of people in the middle. So
yeah. If we could have a perfect practice, that'd be what it is. But was there anything kind of upcoming or that you think you'll be adding into this system, or any questions that you're looking to answer in the next year to 3 years or anything like that?
Yeah, a couple of pieces. I'll try to be brief because I'm you can tell I'm long-winded after this conversation. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
But like I already mentioned earlier, we're having this product going to be coming out pretty soon. Like I anticipate this thing being launched late April, early May is what I'm really shooting for. I don't want to say the name of it yet because I like kind of use it about neuromechanics. I got to do some checking to make sure that this name I have for it isn't already out there. Like I don't want to be
don't fool me.
Yeah, so like right now I'm just ignorant. Like you said, idiot. So funny. We can talk later about idiot. Idiot is actually the procedural steps. We have an acronym, idiot, built into our system. Because say I'm an idiot, you're an idiot. The sooner we realize this, we realize we have to learn to ask better questions. So the whole thing about square one is learning to ask better questions. But we're gonna have this balance-based piece coming out soon. And then I live in Pennsylvania, but my studio gym is in Chicago, and so I fly out there every week. My clients fly me out. But at some point, we're looking to have probably headquarters here in central Pennsylvania. And I don't know if that's 2 years out, 5 years out. I kind of think it's like kind of a midterm deal. And what I'm looking forward to there is like the stuff we were just talking about. Like I'm looking at it's going to be a place like an education center. Yeah. It's going to be a place where people come to get treated, and it's going to be a place like it's going to be the lab. So I'm going to have all the bells and whistles, all the gadgets. Invite guys like you and like, hey, come on in. You have some ideas, and let's just play together. So we just almost have like this lab playground for people that meet our industry friends. Like, hey, let's use your ideas. Let's use your ideas, and let's like cross pollinate each other's ideas and test these things out and really dig in. Like I can't wait to geek out on that stuff because at heart I'm a number nerd. Like I feel like I'm more like an accountant. Like I think I would have been a really good accountant more than even a movement person. So I'm a real numbers. Like I love. I'm one of those geeks that like loves little number stuff. Like it just really fascinates me, and I have a lot of love for that. So that's part of what we're kind of gearing towards. And
Very cool.
At some point we're also probably want to have a podcast because we have cool guys like you that have me on your podcast, and then we're out in the field. We meet cool people all the time. Like, man, I feel like I got to return the favor and kind of shine the spotlight on this crazy, like diverse, intelligent, outside the box thinking people that we're attracting. Like it'd just be really cool. I think we could have. I want to do that. Like I don't want to be the host. I'm going to have to be the host. But I don't want to be the host. I'd rather just get these cool people together and just be a fly in the wall. So I'm not sure what that's going to look like. But those are
just build a cool studio in that lab. Just make sure
exactly.
That's part of the build.
Well, it's the guys that are close. Like we need to have. It doesn't have to be huge, but I want to have like a 400 or 500 square foot studio. Yeah. So we can have like an editing room and all that kind of stuff. So that's in the plans as well. But
very cool. I love it.
2 years or 10 years. I'm not sure the time frame.
Yeah. Well, yeah. If I'm being honest, because again, I play a lot in the golf and running worlds. That's kind of my two
Nice.
areas. But
I love it.
in terms of you know, golf, I keep coming back to because there's such a. I mean, I think about somebody like Jordan Spieth, right, or Jason Day, like top. I mean, world class players, and like you just don't see them winning anymore. Obviously,
Right.
they haven't had an injury. I don't know what they're going through in their personal life, but then you always think about, you said, that one club that somebody's picking up that creates this kind of like whatever that is, right? A psycho-emotional response, or I don't know what it is, right?
Right.
And again, there's so many unanswered questions with just humans, like the complexity of it. I think the more things that you can play around with, and that's what I want people to take away from this podcast, because I'm being honest here, there's going to be people that listen to this that are like, what the hell is this dude talking about? I know there are.
Absolutely.
But if you're not willing to think outside the box and then, like I said, crash the waves of the body of knowledge that you have, other people have against, first principles, you will never go further as a professional or a professional. So like, I love that you're creating this kind of lab and this conglomerate of effort of bringing people in and just kind of playing around with stuff. Cause I wish that would happen a lot more. Like, again, I just had Capo on and he's just wanting to create a conference where he's like, let's get people with very differing ideas in the same room and literally not make it I'm winning the conversation. Let's just talk about these things that are so polarizing, because at the end of the day, the person that needs to win is the patient or the consumer, not us. And that's 100%. A hard thing to swallow sometimes in our field, that it's even if you're the creator of a system, it doesn't matter. Like, it still has to work for the person that it's being, used for. So
and you're always with that person right now in front of you. Like, okay, we just have some great results, but if I'm not helping this guy, it's like, oh man, it's like,
that's the one that
you don't feel that gut wrenching. Like, what am I missing? Who else could I bring on this? Like, if you're not feeling that, you probably should get the freak out of the anyway, because you're not in the right place, man.
That's what drove this in the first place, right? That one guy that you didn't have results with. So
it's making me sick. This guy would come in and I have to charge him. Like, it's killing me, man. I'd be like, you're here to pay your friendship dues because I can't help you, man. So it's like, that's like, this sucks. I was like,
I always tell clients when they come in and they say, I'm better, and I go, I got a dog to make me feel better about myself. Let's actually see if you are better. Like, that's the thing.
Don't tell me what I want to hear. Tell me tell me the truth, and I'll deal with my emotional response. That's not your responsibility, dude. Like, my thing is, just give me the truth. I'm not getting better. You're not getting better if you're lying to me. And just I feel good. Like, don't tell me that. Totally.
Well, hey, let's wrap up with these two kind of fun questions that I always ask everybody. And these you could take this any way you want.
All right.
So what is, and this could be in your field or whatever, what is one thing that you thought used to be just a truism? You're like, I know this is a fact that you've completely changed your mind on. You're like, nope, I don't even think that's in the ballpark anymore.
Yeah. All right. I think as it relates to what all we're talking about, this whole idea of the coach's eye, if you're not a hyper-specific specialized coach, so for those of us who are personal trainers and just even generic strength coaches, PTs, whatever, and just watching movement, I think it's a fool's game, because we can build stories, a multitude of stories. So, like I would say, there's 26 character alphabet in English language, and every year I forget. I mean, like 4 million books or something.
How many words?
I can't remember the numbers, right? So, like the human movement, just from joint actions, there's over 200 joint actions. We can build all kinds of logical stories. So, don't trust what you see and the stories you tell. You have to test those out, because just because it's logical, that's not the same as accurate.
Dude, I can't tell you how much I love that. So in my gait course, I always say, don't tell a narrative that's not true. Because we'll be like, because you lack, or because you're, increased ankle eversion, through stance phase, that's creating an internal rotation moment. And that's why you have back pain and extension. Maybe. Like, you got to kill that part. I was thinking, we got to kill the storyteller. We have to learn how to become better translators of neuromechanics and movement and those types of things. And for the people listening, we're not discounting visual observation. What we're saying is you have to test it. Like,
you got to test it. So that's a good baseline. You come back and check it again. So exactly. So just be careful and cautious of your narrative, because if there's a million narratives that could end to that deal, and it takes you a month to burn through, like, I'm going to rule this out in the next month. Like, you're both going to be dead before you ever help this person if it's the 500th thing you check out. So test it, and test it quick if you can.
Perfect. Okay, here's the last question.
All right.
So the opposite. What is something that you think is absolutely true that has no evidence, no substantiation? Could be in our field, could be something else. I don't know what it is, but you're like, dude, if somebody could prove that this is what I think, you'd be like, yeah, cool. I already know that to be true. Is there anything that really sticks out?
Oh my gosh. I'm afraid to share my first response.
Come on, man.
For fear people write off everything we're doing. And this is probably this is a game I play with people all the time. I ask a similar question. All right. So I always ask, like, I'm not saying something to be totally true. I'm not saying this that I totally believe this to be true. But I'm like, everything's about probability, possibility type stuff. All right, here we go. I'm going to go with it. Bigfoot.
Oh, hey.
Okay.
See, you're not the first person on this podcast to bring that up on that question. So,
and I'm not saying I believe he's out there. I'm just saying, how do we know he's not? You know, again, there's an absence of evidence. I don't know, man. You have all these first-time accounts. I'm just open to it. So I like to ask people, hey, you flip what percentage is it? Like, if you flip a coin or whatever, what's the chance of getting it right? So I'm not saying I'm like in that 99% camp. I'm north of 50. I don't, I'm somewhere between like 51 and like 70.
You also just said that you live in Pennsylvania. I don't know how many horse and buggies are going down the highway, and the possibility of Bigfoot being out there somewhere. Yeah, it's got to cross your mind. So
but I have no personal stories, nothing to go on. I'm just open to the possibility.
Well, and that's a beautiful way to wrap up, because that's what we said is a lot of people are going to be like, oh God, this guy just talked about something I don't know. It's true. Now he brought up Bigfoot. I'm definitely writing him off.
Yeah, totally,
I think it's kind of it's a good way to wrap, because it's like keeping your mind open. I mean, if you listen to, let's listen to the most popular podcast in the world, and I mean, there's going to be a lot of people on there being like, "Oh no, we know Bigfoot's real." So
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have firsthand.
Yeah, we're not saying it's true. Just maybe.
I don't want to rule things out that I don't have evidence either contrary or pro. So I'm like, I'm open to the fact, because there's things you learn all the time. Like, oh, wow, I thought it was this way. Now it's this way. It's a very humbling experience when you realize you don't know everything, and you become a much better learner and more open to things. So, yeah.
What a great analogy to wrap up on, because we understand, if we're having this neurologic perspective on treating a human, we understand very little about the neurology of a human. So to think
100%.
that we're going to toss things out or say this is why it's happening is all theory. I mean, the amount of laws that exist in human physiology is like few. So then we have to keep an open mind. And again, we all know the adage, if we don't have such an open mind that it falls out. So again, that's crashing against the rocks of first principles. So
100%.
I think that's a great way to wrap it up with Bigfoot.
I love it.
Plan on it, but it works.
Well, thanks for saving me and not making me look like a lunatic. I appreciate that.
Like I said, you're not the first person. So I mean, it's a common theme. Well, again, I will share all of Shawn's. I know Instagram is where it seems like you're the most active, so I'll share that in the show notes.
Thank you.
I know that you have, what's the website again?
It's the same as their Instagram account. It's Square One System.
Okay.
So it's a numerical one, and it's singular system, so it's not plural. So it's Square
Well,
One System.
We'll share that, and you have live courses as well as some online courses that are on there, and we'll put that up there as well. Any last closing statements, words of wisdom, anything before we jump off here?
No, I just very much enjoyed the conversation. It was fun. Talking to a guy like you, who's obviously very, very brilliant, intelligent guy, asking great questions, coming in, just trying to understand. I thought that was really, really fun. So again, thank you for having me on and giving me a platform with your audience. I'm very grateful for guys like you who reach out. So thank you very much for doing what you're doing.
Yeah, same to you, man. Keep it up, and whenever that lab's built, I better get an invite. That's all I'm asking.
You will. You're on our short list already, man.
Thank you for tuning in. Please subscribe via YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. If you like the message, please share it. We appreciate it. Thank you.